Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's live session where we're going to be focusing on black and white. So we've got a great shot from Russell Ord. He's a Fujiflm ex-photographer based out of Australia, and he's kindly loaned me this shot to take a look at, which is shot, I believe, on a GFX100, so 100 megapixels. Lots of super nice quality to play with as well, and to see what we can get out of it. You can see from the browser just above me, I've had a go at this already just before the broadcast and yesterday as well, so let's see what we can pull out of it this time. Don't forget to let us know where you're watching from. Feel free to hit us up with any questions in the comments and we'll do our best to answer those as well. So let's get to it. Now let's just hide the browser so we've got a bit more space. Great shot out of camera. This is literally as it comes out of camera. So pretty sweet exposure. Well done, Russell. You know, white balance is good. You know, it's kind of almost ready to go, which is why I thought this would be a nice example to convert to black and white, because it doesn't really need much editing before we do that. Now, normally, if I was going to make a black and white, I would fix any sort of exposure errors or anything like that first and foremost. But as I said, this is spot on, great exposure. I don't really want to mess with the contrast or anything just yet, because when we're going to convert to our black and white, that's kind of when we want to make our decisions about contrast. So let's dive straight into the black and white tool, which by default is ironically in the color tool tab. So we're going to say enable black and white, and then that will give us our black and white conversion straight away, pretty much. Now the bank of sliders underneath, which you can see, they control the density of each of the color tones in the shot. So red, yellow, green, cyan, blue, magenta. Now, if I'm completely honest, I don't do this in a massively scientific way. I grab each slider and just literally see what effect it has on the shot. Now, red is obviously going to pick up some skin tones, but if we pull that down, you see that looks pretty ugly as such because it's not picking up the skin as a whole. But I'll bring it down a tiny bit, and then yellows you can see has a very small effect, probably just where it's a bit lighter on the other side of his face. So I might just bring that up a little bit. Green I doubt is going to have a great deal of effect. Cyan, you can barely see a small change in the background. Blue, that's probably going to pick out some of the cooler tones in the background as it did. And magenta, not a great deal. So with those sliders, you might find sometimes there's a big reaction depending on the color tones in the shot. In this case, there's less of a reaction because it's a relatively, if we turn this off, you can see we've got the reds, yellows of the skin tone and then the cool tones in the background, and that's about it. So the sliders aren't going to necessarily have, you know, a massive impact straight away. But that's fine, because now we can start to think about the kind of contrast that we want to have and vignettings and other things. So first of all, again, exposure and everything looks pretty good, but it's a bit on the flat side. If we look at our levels tool, I'm just going to hit auto on there just to set our shadow and highlight points, because that will give us a nice base start point for our contrast. Now in terms of the overall density, it's maybe getting a bit too dark in his face, so I might just lift up the brightness a touch. So the brightness is going to raise the midtones, and if I hover my cursor just kind of around here under his right eye, if you look at the histogram top left of the screen, you'll see a little orange line dance around, and you can see, look at that, his skin tone is pretty much bang on a mid-tone. So the brightness is going to have like the biggest impact when we start adjusting. I don't really want to lift the exposure because the shadows are kind of about right. I don't want the highlights to get any brighter, so brightness kind of makes sense. So that's just going to lift his skin tone a little bit. Now it's still a bit on the flat side for my liking, so I might put in a bit more contrast. And now with a portrait, let's zoom in a bit, see all that lovely detail. Now with a portrait, generally clarity can be a bad idea because it's going to accentuate a lot of the sort of rugged details, etc., which I wouldn't want to do on my face, for example. But for this kind of context, it makes sense. So if we up the clarity, if I just push it maybe a little bit too much, obviously that's going to be too harsh. So I'm going to stick with it. If we just open up the shot, I'm going to go to about that point. Now for me, this is probably getting a bit too bright just on the right hand side, but I'm going to deal with that a little bit later. So I'm going to pull that down a bit, and then blacks, those deal with the very darkest tones. I'm just going to open them up a tiny